record this. And for those of you that are now on here, welcome. We've got some people joining us on Facebook. We got people on Zoom, and we'll be putting this on YouTube as well. So this is going to be all over the place here. Welcome, everyone. Second. Okay, we'll just admit everybody as they come in. So I want to welcome Dr. Isaac Eliaz. So this is one of my new friends. I really think that his work is really interesting. It's so relative to my 22 years of specializing in fibromyalgia, and you're going to hear that tonight, what he's going to share tonight. Some of you may have heard him in my Fibromyalgia Summit that we had in May of this year, so the Fibromyalgia Summit 2022. One of my favorite interviews where we talked about the survival paradox, and we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. It's a perfect fit for fibromyalgia, and it explains so many things, I think, that are not explained in the fibromyalgia community. You're going to get to hear that tonight. But let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Eliaz. He's a leading expert in the field of integrative medicine, specializing in cancer, detoxification, immunity, and complex conditions. He's a respected physician, researcher, best-selling author, educator, and mind-body practitioner. Dr. Eliaz partners with leading research institutes, including Harvard, National Institute of Health, Columbia, and others, to co-author studies on integrative therapies or for cancer, heavy metal toxicity, and others. He is the founder and medical director of, and I'm going to try to get this right, I messed it up last time, Amitabha Medical Clinic in Santa Rosa, California, where he's pioneered numerous integrative functional medicine therapies. And we're going to be talking about some really fun stuff tonight. So Isaac, after all that, welcome. I'm so delighted to have you on here. Thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you for having me. I love our conversations.
Well, let me share a little bit more about your book. So for those of you, again, that saw the Fibromyalgia Summit, this year's summit that I had, you might have seen Dr. Eliaz give a presentation on the survival paradox, which is his best-selling book. And I became aware of Dr. Eliaz several months ago. I was really interested in the cell danger theory. And this is a theory that I had been exposed to a few years ago, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. But reaching out to get a speaker that could discuss cell danger theory, I came across Dr. Eliaz, and I came across his work and started listening to some of the stuff he was sharing. And I ordered his book, started reading his book. I thought, oh my gosh, I got to get this guy on this Fibromyalgia Summit. He's going to just be able to explain so much that oftentimes is unexplainable. So the survival paradox is, to me, it's a game changer. And I think if you listen tonight and you're open to this paradigm, it's going to change the way you think about health, about the way you think about your health, and what you need to do to get to the healthy place you want to get. So many of you are looking for answers to get healthy, and we're going to be sharing some of those tonight. So with saying all that, Isaac, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you share a little bit about your background and your work with fibromyalgia and some of the things you developed to help with your fibromyalgia patients.
Yeah, of course. And again, thank you for your kind words and for the opportunity. And fibromyalgia especially was a favorite topic of mine in the beginning of my career in my 20s, which was in the 80s. And I realized that it's a condition, and this time it wasn't really as recognized, it was not really as a condition. There were people who didn't recognize that it's a medical condition. And so over the years, I developed views on fibromyalgia, which are both from multiple medical systems, as being part of being a licensed acupuncturist, a Chinese doctor, and of course, a Western doctor. And I think the survival paradox really encompasses it. Of course, today I'm going to touch just a few angles. I don't want to go too much into the cell metabolism because it's a whole different topic, but I'll do my best to help people get like a aha moment, that can really help them, so we can get going. So so what I thought to do is we can start with a little bit of a presentation, and then we can have a question and answer. So today we're going to look at the survival paradox protein galectin-3. It's the concept of the survival paradox and how it affects fibromyalgia, pain, and inflammation, and really understand the complexity of these symptoms and the simplicity in the same time. So a little bit about my background. I've got close to 30 years of clinical practice and experience, getting close to 40, and decades of training and teaching in mind-body medicine, which is a big part of my life, of what I do. And again, I'm a medical doctor. I have a Master of Science in Chinese Medicine. And I wrote the book Survival Paradox, which is, at least I feel, a paradigm shift. I'm a very active researcher with dozens of published papers, with multiple NIH grants, specifically researching the survival paradox protein galectin-3. So if we look at fibromyalgia as a big concept, we're really looking at systemic inflammation and neuroinflammation. We're looking at the strong connection between the gut dysbiosis and the brain as it affects neuroinflammation, as it affects autoimmunity. And of course, when you talk about gut dysbiosis, you immediately talk about toxins and mold and pesticide and heavy metals. And it's really post-infection immune dysregulation. And in this sense, tens of millions of fibromyalgia have been added to this basket post-COVID. And so it's getting much more attention now. The chronic pain, the chronic fatigue post-infection, and really understanding this. And it's driven by this inappropriate survival response. So the cell danger response is really a subcategory. It's one small angle of a bigger concept, which is the survival paradox. And actually, I came up with this term as a reflection of decades of studies. I really wasn't aware of the cell danger. And then as I wrote my book, I started talking about it, and people kind of connected me to this. So it's great that other people have been diving into this. So what is the role of survival paradox protein galectin-3? So fibromyalgia patients have high levels of inflammatory compounds, including the survival paradox protein galectin-3, which we'll touch in a moment. And what galectin-3 drives, what the survival paradox drives, it drives the cytokine storm, TNF-alpha, interleukin-6, etc. It drives histamine release, mast cell activation, which is really an epidemic now. And as a result, it will drive systemic inflammation and fibrosis, both in the body and in the nervous system. And as a result, we get neuroinflammation and neurodegeneration. So as a more long-term effect of this neuroinflammation, and gut dysbiosis and biofilm formation that, of course, allows for different infections, for different toxic compounds to hide and then wake up at the time of stress. As we know, people with Lyme disease, they're under stress, the condition wakes up. And one of the main symptoms is fatigue and pain everywhere. And we can look at how the inflammatory compounds are behaving on the local level compared to a systemic level. If we have time, we'll touch it. So taking a step back, what is a survival paradox? And we are built to survive. We are innately built to survive from beginningless times. Every cell in our body, every organ, us as people, communities, societies, etc. And since it's an automated response, we have to respond immediately without control, and we do it through the nervous system, through the autonomic nervous system, through the sympathetic system. And it starts in a fraction of a second, and we also can counteract it and balance it through the parasympathetic system. And within minutes, we start a biochemical response. And this biochemical response is driven by the protein galectin-3, which is our alarm. Alarm means it starts the process, and the problem is that different than the nervous system, it doesn't turn off as quickly. So once it's on, it often stays on, and then it starts a cascade of events. So if we look in big picture at what happened, even from a sympathetic process, we either fight, which equates to inflammation, friction, fighting, or flight, we run away, we hide, we create a microenvironment, a different metabolic environment, which is key for fibromyalgia. That's why, for example, some people will benefit from hyperbaric oxygen, because you bring enough oxygen, you break this barrier. So we look at the hiding, it will create fibrosis and organ dysfunction. So we got the cytokine storm, and this, of course, can drive mycotoxin damage, and all of this will drive chronic illness, aging, cancer, and immune diseases, either immune dysregulation, autoimmunity. So the paradox, as you can understand, is that what the same mechanism that is allowing us to survive is the same mechanism that causes us to be sick, that causes us to struggle, to be unhappy, and shortens our life. So it's a vicious circle of a survival response that causes inflammation, that causes organ degeneration, that causes abnormal metabolism, the cells changes, the tissue changes, there's not, the receptors change, and we get a worse survival response, and it just goes in the circle. And that's the survival response loop, and we got to cut this loop. So we are very focused on inflammation now in integrative medicine for a long time. Post-COVID, also Western medicine is very aware of it. But inflammation, as you can see, is not the cause. It's a result of the survival response. So deeper healing will be by addressing the survival response. And the real deep healing is when understand why do we have the survival response. And biochemically, it's driven by the protein, galectin-3, which is really the bus, the driver, the train that gets a signal that something is wrong, attaches itself to different damaging ligands, different damaging compounds. This is that have a sugar, a carbohydrate in them, through this receptor called carbohydrate recognition domain, creates a pentamer, and then it can go to different tissues. So it comes to tissues, you get pentamer attaching to pentamer, and you get a microenvironment, a biofilm, an arteriosclerotic plaque, a place where cancer can grow, etc. So looking at this, it's produced by the body in response to stress, to toxins, to illness, to injury and aging, and it triggers inflammation, fibrosis, organ damage. So if we block it, if we can really block it, we can really halt these conditions. So one way to block it is not to be in a survival response. So you can already get a sense of the psychological, emotional, lifestyle importance. But we can also block it biochemically, and that's the gift of nature we got by using modified citrospectin, pectosol, which has about 80 published papers in multiple conditions. So how does it work? The galectin-3 attaches to a ligand, and these ligands can drive immune dysregulation, abnormal growth of blood vessel, stickiness of cell that, for example, will cause metastases or lack of circulation or fibrosis, a certain ligand that will specifically disrupt the blood-brain barrier and cause neuroinflammation. And once it attaches, it creates a pentamer. And as we look at this, the pentamer creates a biofilm, a lattice formation. So in the alternative cancer field, the idea that there is a coating under the cancer, around the cancer, is a concept that Virginia Livingstone, when she developed vaccines for cancer in the 50s, was talking about. But it's really now, finally, we have the explanation. It's really galectin-3. So when we got galectin-3 creating these multiple pentamers that attaches to the cell membrane, to the cell receptors, it changes the microenvironment. What do I mean microenvironment? Let's say here, when there is no lattice formation, oxygen can arrive more easily. The cell doesn't feel in danger. It's not in a survival mode. It can produce energy in a very efficient way. I'm not getting into this in this lecture on the specific metabolism, but through the mitochondria, 1 molecule of glucose, 36 molecules of ATP. When there is a sense of blockage, no oxygen, the cells goes into a survival mode, can produce energy much faster. 100 times faster, but only 5% efficiency. And a lot of toxic byproducts, including lactic acid, that causes muscle pain and contraction. And then the cell now gets the pH changes, the cell become acidic, which is very common in pain, right? And that's why oxygen can help pain many times. And then the cell gets a signal, wow, I'm into crisis, and it becomes a vicious cycle. So that's why when we look at diseases that where galectin-3 plays a contributing factor, you see this everywhere, everywhere. And so many of them are, you can see inflammation in all of them, right? Atherosclerosis, dermatitis, kidney failure, pneumonia, encephalitis, inflammation of the brain, systemic sclerosis, fibrosis, cancer, etc., affecting the nervous system, diabetes, etc. So the importance of this, and that's why it's so important to understand that we are dealing with something which we call an upstream molecule, an upstream down the river, or an upstream down the waterfall. And it's triggered by aging. As we age, we have more galectin-3, triggers by infections, right? With so many people, long haul COVID is a classical example, hitting us in the face, triggered by stress, why people with fibromyalgia know they do worse in stress, and triggered by trauma and injury, physical, emotional, psychological, immediate trauma, past trauma, epigenetic trauma from past generation. In my book, I tell the story about my grandfather who was a Holocaust survivor. I'm named after him, and how I had certain pains that I felt were not related to me. And when I healed my own issue and trauma with the Holocaust, how it healed me and healed my mother, who didn't know it, I'm doing it because of the multi-generation trauma and multi-generational healing. So when we have this upstream, midstream, it will create what we talked about, the inflammation and cytokine storm, the immune dysfunction, the abnormal cell activity, and will lead to specific conditions, biofilm and dysbiosis, organ failure, autoimmune disease, very common also with fibromyalgia, sepsis, fibrosis, and cancer. So often we try to catch and treat conditions downstream by trying to remove a certain compound, right? Many medications do this, specific receptors, or we try to block some cytokines, and we know very well, and again, the COVID was a great lesson, it doesn't work because we are trying to stop the waterfall by catching it with a bucket. When we block galectin-3, we block it at the top of the cascade. It's like shutting down the waterfall so no water is falling down. So as we understand now a little bit about inflammation, we want to take a little bit a deeper dive into neuroinflammation. So in our body, the immune cells that is upregulated during inflammation is the macrophage. The macrophage turn into inflammatory macrophage. They excrete galectin-3 that get attached to the cell membrane, and the process I just described starts. The same thing happens in the brain, but the macrophage of the brain, the cleaning cell of the brain, is the glial cell. And the glial cell triggers neuroinflammation as a solution attempt in the brain, driving injury, inflammation, and fibrosis. So neurodegenerative diseases are driven by glial cell, by astral cells, and they will drive neuroinflammation. And galectin-3 drives neuroinflammation. There are studies, multiple studies showing how galectin-3 disrupts the blood-brain barrier. Molecules that are not supposed to penetrate into the brain do penetrate into the brain. They create an inflammatory response. For example, when we have lack of blood supply to the brain, if we have a stroke, if we have a TIA, if we have even a temporary lack of oxygen, the brain responds with a survival response with elevated expression of galectin-3 that drives inflammation. In these cell models, animal models, when you block them with modified cytospectin, you attenuate, you reduce the inflammatory damage. So the glial cell activation, which is much greater in the brains of fibromyalgia patients, and it alters the pain signals and negatively affects neurotransmitter production. And again, as we said, galectin-3 drives this. So blocking it will reduce painful inflammation. It will take time, it will regulate it. And intracellularly, it will help a wonderful substance, which I'm not going to elaborate on today, but I want to mention that helps because it penetrates the blood-brain barrier, is honokiol. Honokiol will regulate the cell activity, will reduce glutamate to GABA, and will regulate the pain cycle. So many fibromyalgia patients benefit from this combination. So how do we block galectin-3? We block it by using modified citrus pectin. So regular pectin is a low is a long chain of carbohydrate, specifically galacturonic acid, polysaccharide, not glucose, with side chains, and it does not get absorbed into the bloodstream. So it's good as a fiber. It can absorb some toxin in the gut, and it's part, for example, of my formulation, glyphodetox, because it binds to pesticides in the gut. But modified citrus pectin, and in this case, specifically Pectosol, it's the only commercially available modified citrus pectin that is researched, that has clinical evidence, that has been researched now for almost 30 years, and has, as I said, almost 80 published papers, including a lot on inflammation, on cytokine storm, on post-infection conditions. Modified citrus pectin is a small size and a specific structure. It gets absorbed systemically. There it has its galectin-3 blocking effect. It also removes heavy metals, and it regulates the abnormal immune response. So it has to be low molecular weight, so it can get absorbed through the gut. It has to have a specific structure. So just to illustrate it, that's a long chain of galacturonic acid with side chains of neutral sugars, rhamnose and arabinose, which are very important for immune response. There's a compound, there is a chain structure in MCP, 10% in Pectosol, called rhamnogalacturonan 2, which is very similar to what you have in mistletoe. It's an immune-enhancing compound. So when you specifically change the structure and reduce the methylation on the sides, then here, when you have galectin-3 and the different nasty ligands, the damaging carbohydrate, and now you have MCP coming in. It's a long MCP. It dislodges the different ligands, and you disrupt the biofilm, you disrupt the lattice formation, and you stop the inflammatory process. And then what happens from this diagram that we looked a moment from the waterfall at full speed, you simply block it at the top. And as a result, you get multiple benefits. And this explains why you will read research about modified citrus pectin as an oncological support, for autoimmunity, for heavy metals, for biofilm as the prebiotic, for the liver health, for lung health, for kidney health, because it's a universal mechanism. So when we look at the research, we can see that MCP reduces neuroinflammation and pain, protects blood-brain barrier, supports cognitive health, very important for fibromyalgia, provides prebiotic gut support. Again, healthy gut is healthy body, and help to detoxify the body. Multiple papers on removal of heavy metals, mercury, lead, even uranium, cadmium, nickel, etc. It balances the immune response. It reduces a different chronic immune cytokine. As a result, it reduces systemic inflammation and pain, and it has a synergistic effect. So you can use modified citrus pectin with any other supplements or medication that you are using. So how to use modified citrus pectin, how to use Pectosol? For maintenance, for people who are in good health, minimal dose. Few people need such a low dose, but it's still of significant benefit, is 1 scoop or 6 capsules a day. And people who want enhanced benefit for joint health, for detoxification, 1 scoop or 6 capsules twice a day. And for the full dose, for optimal dose, for immune regulation, oncology, nutritional support, for supporting of a healthy aging process, 1.5 scoops or 9 capsules twice a day. So The other formula I want to talk about, Pedma Basic, is an ancient Tibetan herbal formula that specifically has benefit for circulation, inflammation, neuroinflammation, and for fibromyalgia. It has dozens and dozens of published papers, including over 30 published clinical trials, including a meta-analysis study. What's amazing about it is that it's a formula of 19 botanicals that are not even concentrated. It's a natural compound, very small amount, but unique synergistic effect, and it supports and improves inflammation, pain, arthritis, immune balance, help with infections, and help with circulation and cardiovascular health. A lot of studies. It's an approved drug in Europe for decades for peripheral artery disease. The other last part I want to touch briefly is the importance of the gut-brain axis. And it's a big discovery in naturopathic integrative medicine in the last 30 years with the microbiome, but it's one of the most ancient principles in Chinese medicine because we have two digestive systems. We have a mental digestive system that happens in the brain, and we have a physical digestive system that happens in the digestive system. So naturally, there will be a connection between them. So dysbiosis drives altered pain signaling. 90% of serotonin is produced in the gut. So when the microbiome is disrupted, we get reduction in production of serotonin, and we get an imbalanced signaling from the gut to the brain that increases pain. And that's why often, as part of pain syndrome, people will have gut issues. And there are certain bacteria that specifically will affect neurotransmitter production and reduce level of short-chain fatty acids like butyrate that are needed for neurological health and pain signal. So it's important to really address a pre and probiotic approach for fibromyalgia. My favorite formulation called EcoProbiotic is multiple 11 different strains of bacteria that are, it's a liquid form, that are grown on immune enhancing and digestive balancing botanicals and a little bit of modified citrus pectin. It's fermented on this, and as such it has life. It actually changes the energy of the gut. It also increases organic acid, which are essential for optimal acid pH in the GI. So we specifically add a little bit of modified citrus pectin to the process, not as a modified citrus pectin, but as a prebiotic to help this combination work better. And so it's important to look at anti-inflammatory diet. It's essential. Vegetarian diet many times is very useful, but often people do need animal protein. It's very specific, very individualized. You have to really adjust it to what works for you. Intermittent fasting can be very useful. And of course, avoid the basic inflammation driving foods, sugar, gluten, trans fats, refined carbohydrate, processed meats. And healthy stress relief. If it's through meditation, breath work, spending time in nature, social support, creative outlets, allowing our being to expand. And that's a big part of what the survival paradox is discussing in its in the 3 chapters of solutions: detoxification, healing the scars of survival, and how to free the survival paradox. So, Rodger, that's a little bit briefly about fibromyalgia, and I'll be please share. Is there any questions, discussions?
Well, between your accent, your Israeli accent, and my Southern accent, people are trying to, they're swinging back and forth. What the heck did he say? So hopefully we'll be able to answer some questions here. But before we open up the chat box, both here on Zoom and Facebook, I'd like to just have a little conversation. Let me make sure this is off here. you covered so many things that I think that really it could just kind of go over people's head. They don't really get it, even though they have fibromyalgia and they're listening to this and they're going, "Oh yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good." But I want to point out a few things, and in your book, I mean, it's like every other page has got nothing but yellow for the highlights, things that I was reading through and go, "Oh yeah, that explains what's going on with this fibromyalgia patient," but the survival paradox, this whole idea, when we get under stress, when we get under stress or have some type of stressful event, that it initiates this survival reaction where literally body almost shuts down the metabolism, the cellular metabolism, and it does this as a self-preservation. The problem with that, as you so eloquently described, is that there's a time and a place for galactin-3, which is a natural reaction to release inflammatory chemicals to help with anytime we have a sense of being threatened, whether that's from an infection or a toxin or some type of trauma, something that's going on, initiating, this event. But it can get out of control. And when it gets out of control and not turned off, now it sets up this cascade of all these different problems. And the reason why I point this out is because, I'll have patients that I will look at their lab work in the beginning when I start working with them, and they'll have elevated inflammatory markers like CRP and SED rate and sometimes ANA and some of these other things. And they'll have, elevated A1C levels, blood sugar issues. But as I start to work with them using my protocols that I've been using for 2 decades, most of the time, not always, but I'm able to get those markers to normal. And within a period of time, these patients are doing really well. And I may not hear from them until a year, 2, 3 years later, like here recently. Well, now someone's contacting me and saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm a basket case." And I look at their new blood work, and their new blood work still looks pretty decent, but something has happened to set them off on this tailspin of a fibro flare. And it's this whole thing about the survival paradox. So to me, it makes perfect sense that we can do everything right as physicians, as healthcare practitioners with our patients. And yet there's an underlying innate, inborn mechanism that can just go haywire that most doctors don't even know anything about. To me, that was an aha moment. That explained a lot of what I saw with my patients who were having fibro flares that were doing well. Then all of a sudden, they just hit the wall again.
Yeah, it's so true. And we have to really understand that. So yeah, that's why it's a paradigm shift. And we have to understand that it's dynamic. We go into a survival mode multiple times in an hour, probably in a day. And we can also, so we go into a survival mode mentally. Every time something happens and we get attached to it, or we react to it, we hold to it, we push it away, it's a survival response. We want it, we don't want it, but then the body knows to relax. But these imprints affect us. So what you're describing, I mean, the world went through such a stressful time in the last few years. Yeah. And as a result, you can see this, but we have to understand that one area that we have to look at with fibromyalgia is that we can make a lot of changes, but there are things that are not under our control, and part of them is toxic exposure. We are exposed to heavy metals, to mycotoxins, to environmental toxins, to industrial toxins, and especially to pesticides. Even if we eat organic, all of us have certain levels of glyphosate in our body. And glyphosate is the most common pesticide, 330 million pounds a year in the United States, 1 pound per person, okay? I mean, it's insane to think how much. So it disrupts the gut barrier, which we talked about. It disrupts the blood-brain barrier. It mimics glycine, the smallest amino acid, with a neuroprotective, neuroinhibitory, relax, and neurotransmitter. It becomes a neuroexcitatory in the brain, causing causing pain. It affects kidney function. It affects liver detoxification. That's only one compound, and there are many other pesticides. So as part of our strategy, we also have to detoxify properly, which is an important concept. And that's why when I start talking about the solutions for the survivor paradox, the first chapter is detoxification. And the ultimate detoxification is letting go of the survivor response, which means we accept whatever happens. And so it's fundamental in our being that as people who are built to survive, we don't want to accept change. Because what is survival? Survival is not accepting that whatever arises and expresses itself is going to have a certain lifespan and it's going to fall away. It can be our whole life. It can be this planet. It can be a certain company. It can be a season. And it can be one thought, one feeling. So we hold. When we hold, the cell membrane changes. The receptor change. The metabolism changes. The cell contracts. The cell forgets to breathe. There's something called hypoxia-inducing factor that is induced by lack of oxygen, that I do a lot of work with, which shuts down the mitochondria because we need energy fast. You get lactic acid, everything contracts. That's a classical fibro process. Right. So sugars, refined sugars, abnormal diet, a sense of stress and crisis, just like you described with the patients, pesticides that disrupt the receptors on the membranes, and of course, epigenetic effects. So we are very complex. We are complex beings. We often don't talk about it. We are made, I'm rounding the number, out of 50 trillion cells. Trillion, not million. Million times 1,000 is billion, and billion times 1,000 is trillion. So 50 trillion cells, and Rodger, each of them has close to 1 million reactions a second. Wow. So I love to say it's truly a miracle that you and I can talk now with so many reactions in our body, right? So something in our body allows us to work together in harmony. And the survival response disrupts this harmony. Because what allows us to work in harmony, what keeps us alive is our heart. Our heart never stops to survive. Our heart survival is that it flows all the time. Very different. Our head functions by stopping and analyzing. Our heart functions by flowing and flowing, accepting dirty blood, connecting with the universe, giving clean blood. I don't want to go into big detail. It's a whole lecture. It's what open heart medicine, my approach relates. When we lose this connection to our heart, that's when our trouble starts. That's when we contract. And the hallmark of fibromyalgia is contraction. It's trigger point pain. We can feel them, right? It's a knot where you're not supposed to have a knot. So in this sense, because everything is changeable, everything is possible. And fibromyalgia patients know they can feel really bad, and suddenly for a few minutes, everything is okay, right? Suddenly pains go down. And then it doesn't hold. It often doesn't hold because the cell produced enough energy to feel better, but it did not produce it in a healthy way. That's a key concept in Chinese medicine. So classical symptom for fibromyalgia, patients, right? I felt great. I did too much. How many times do you hear this, right?
Oh,
and then I paid the price for 3 days. Why? Because there was a dysregulation of the mitochondrial cellular energy function compared to our need. So there is a balance. And the balance is very important because there are a few ways of balancing. One way of balancing is cleaning the system, making it more efficient, and expanding and expanding. The more we expand, the more we have oxygen, the more we are free. The other way is we become more conservative and cautious, right? People will say, I'm very careful, I don't do too much. And then slowly you see this patient's life contracting and contracting and contracting.
Yeah.
So they do less, they can eat less. Now I can eat only rice and water, right? Like extreme macrobiotics, right? Well, so why? Because the gut lining is not healthy. Our ability to accept and absorb what we determine as being toxic or non-toxic becomes very tight. So part of healing with fibromyalgia is having a bigger view, a more tolerant, flexible view. How do we do it? By being less reactive. What is the ultimate reactivity? It's an allergy, right? Allergy is you reacting when we're not supposed to. Now we are in a world which is so stressed, we react in an inappropriate way. One of the epidemics you and I see all the time is mast cell activation.
Yeah.
And what do people try to do? They give different antihistamine, which I understand helps on an acute basis. I participate in the summits. I'm gentle about not criticizing anymore too much about it, but it's not a solution. It's a suppression. When we expand our being, which means our neuroinflammation is going down, then we can have a downstream true benefit. And the survival paradox offers a scientific base explanation that really encompasses how we live our life, what we do with our life, and the quality of our health. That's the profundity of the paradigm.
So you gave this whole theory that I've been sharing for 22 years, this whole idea about, you call it the survival paradox. And now that's what I'm going to call it. But up until then, I just talked about, we had this innate inborn ability to heal ourselves.
Exactly.
You know, we don't have to think about taking 12 breaths per minute. We don't have to think about pumping blood through miles and miles of arteries and veins every minute. We have a new stomach lining every 5 days.
Exactly.
With the surface cells that contact food being renewed 5 minutes, you know? So we have this healing dynamo, and we have a system that really kind of coordinates these different reactions. It monitors and then reacts. The hypothalamus, which is a group of nerve cells in the brain that really kind of monitors what's going on and then reacts as usually in an appropriate way. But when it gets under too much stress, it can start to become dysfunctional, and then the systems that it's supposed to regulate become dysfunctional. Now, I've always talked about treating upstream is taking the stress off the hypothalamus.
Right.
So I had it wrong in a lot of ways, because really upstream, really from what you're sharing with us, is really turning off this galactin-3, this threat.
Yeah, but this is biochemically. If you look at the signaling, and you know, in many esoteric spiritual system, in everyone there is the concept of breath, right? And the concept of connection between heaven and earth. You know, if it's, you know, we pray to God, if it's qigong, if it's a central line in different, you know, yogic system, it's a central line. The central line that the bottom is in our pelvis, right, in our perineum. Right. And you can say that from a reproduction, the ovaries, the testicles, you know, the uterus, the prostate, and then it goes up the thyroid, the pineal gland, the pituitary. The highest gland is the hypothalamus. Mm-hmm. So in this sense, from a nervous system point of view, you are correct, because it gets a lot of, what does the hypothalamus do? It gets feedback loops from all the body, right, and it regulates. What does the survival response do? Exactly the same. Yeah. And within it, we have to understand, we now know that there is more information going from the heart to the brain than from the brain to the heart. We know that the electromagnetic field of the heart is 100 times bigger, 100 times, than the electromagnetic field of the brain that we measure all the time, right? So what we feel in our heart is affecting every cell in our body 24/7. More than this, it affects people around us. And because of what you said, because of the innate ability to heal, so you talked about the gut lining, the stomach lining changing every 5 days. Our thought changes every second, right? Yeah. Our emotional expression can change. People who listen to us now, they went through so many emotions. It means because everything is changeable, as long as we don't hold to the survival response and we don't let go, That's why everything is possible. That's why I call it infinite healing potential. Open heart medicine, the infinite healing potential of love and compassion. Because to have love and compassion, we can't hold. We have to share. And in this sense, one of my favorite sayings is that not everyone will be a miracle, but anyone can be a miracle because of what you said, Rodger, because everything is changeable, because everything is regenerated, because everything is changes. So I used to call, when I teach meditation and healing retreat, I used to call it detoxification. We let go. Transformation, we change, which you talked about, but also on a cellular level, and then healing. That's when healing happens. So in this sense, Survivor Paradox explains, it does give a bigger home for what you've been doing. And as you know, what you do works, and it works because it addresses the basic pattern that can affect fibromyalgia, and there are different causes, and that's why there are different treatments, right?
Absolutely. And I want to point out some of the things that you mentioned earlier that I think are really important that people catch and understand this. So you shared earlier, this was something that really resonated with me in the book. The fact that, and you shared it here tonight, the fact that we have past trauma that some of us are holding on to. And we look at, in fibromyalgia, the research shows that many individuals who have fibromyalgia came from a very stressful household. And that, for different reasons. I mean, it could have been, an abusive household. It could have been just an incredibly stressful environment. They could have had an illness. Maybe they were in a military family, moved around a lot, but for whatever reason, they were under a lot of stress as a young child, and they lose their plasticity,
right?
Their ability to rebound to stress. And so they go along, and maybe in their early adulthood, maybe getting out of college, starting a family, whatever it is, but something comes along, some kind of stressor that's the straw that breaks the camel's back. And that's where they start to develop these symptoms of fibromyalgia. And before you know it, they're in a full-blown fibromyalgia diagnosis because of this lack of ability to be able to handle this stress. To me, that's the survival paradox. And, that paints that picture.
Yeah, completely. And it's very interesting for me. For decades, usually I don't share it in lectures. For decades, when I teach meditation and healing, I'm highly trained in meditation. I would make a diagram of past, present, future, and I will relate it to multiple generations. And I will explain how through meditation you can heal multiple generations. And in my book, I tell my story how when my mother couldn't watch. I'm named after my grandfather Isaac, who died at age 50 from stomach cancer, because he couldn't stomach the fact that 10 out of his 12 siblings were killed by the Nazis. We never knew about it. He died in the early 50s. In 2007, when my grandmother died at the age of 98, in her funeral, my mother turned around and says, he lost 10 of his siblings. We were never told about it. And I since childhood had this very strong pain in the center of my chest, which now has disappeared 5 years ago. So all of my life, and upper back pain and pain here. And I realized that it's connected to a trauma from the Holocaust. And my mother couldn't see any movies or programs about the Holocaust. She was traumatized. And when I healed and my chest opened up and the pain went away, suddenly my mother started seeing TV programs about the Holocaust without me telling her. So this is a multiple generation. I went back and healed it back to my grandfather, and his energy now was healed, and it affected my mother. So we know there are studies about worms, silkworms with 13 generations of epigenetic. But when you see it on your own body and on your mother, it's like it's a aha moment,
Yeah.
And so of course it's also affect the function of my nervous system. I tell the book the story how I improved my ability to remember names. That was a multi-generational issue in the family. So it's also even in this kind of symptoms. So I improved my baseline, but my baseline wasn't my baseline. It was an epigenetic baseline. So really the message for for people is, since everything is changeable, everything is possible, and you never know when it's going to happen. It can happen a second from now. It can happen in many years from now. We just have to keep going. And what you mentioned about the plasticity, it's really the rubber band example. We have to keep the flexibility. So one of the misguided longevity, and you see it in the pulse, but people really know the Chinese pulse very well. The pulse loses its flexibility, and you see that it stretches just at the edges because we're trying to survive. And at some point, it's going to be cut. So we want to gain our flexibility. And the opposite of flexibility, of fluidity, is heat and dryness, inflammation, and hardness, fibrosis. And both of them are driven by the survival response, right?
Yeah.
So you can see the connection.
Yeah. So with this galactin-3 that's driving inflammation, causing biofilms, you mentioned that a little bit tonight, but these biofilms where infections and toxins can literally hide out and not be found and cannot be eliminated because they're in this goo. And so you're creating these pockets of disease within your body that cannot be eliminated because of this process. But as you start to eliminate and turn off galactin-3 with this modified citrus pectin, this pectisol that you've developed, now we start to see that inflammation goes down and chronic infections and toxins and things that have not been able to be eliminated effectively can now, they're exposed, and now we can get rid of those. One of the things that I'm seeing with my patients using the pectisol that you developed is I'm seeing a lot of my mold patients in particularly are really benefiting from using this product because, and there's a lot of good binders out there, and I use different ones, and I play around with them, but with these mold toxins, I'm really seeing that not only does the pectisol help them to get that toxin out, that mold, whatever that toxin is, but oftentimes it will turn off the inflammation and they have less pain quicker than these other binders that I've been using. To me, that was a nice byproduct, that not only could we get the toxins out, but we were able to shut down that pain in a fairly quick time frame.
Roger, you were reading my mind. I was just going to give this an example, but thank you. Pectisol is an amazing binder, and we know it, but it's more than a binder, because binders, when they bind, when they pull out toxins, the body responds with an inflammatory response. That's why people who use cholestyramine or charcoal, they get a lot of side effects.
Yeah, Herxheimer. Yeah,
exactly. So we have now clinics, very large Lyme clinics or mold clinics or mycotoxin. Every patient is on pectisol because they don't have they don't Herx anymore, because we are attenuating the abnormal inflammatory response. Exactly.
Yeah. So, so with these mold patients that have fibro, I mean, that's just about all I do, but I have a lot of patients that have fibro, and, fibro is just a name. So I'm seeing this with my mold patients, and then I'm realizing, well, golly, it's helping with the pain in the mold. Why am I not using it with my fibro patients just in general? So now I'm starting to see that, adding that to my other protocols. And I guess it's another step, treating higher up the cascade there. And I'm seeing, really good results there. Another subgroup of patients that I see are the long haulers. And these are people that I haven't seen in a while. They've been doing great. And all of a sudden I'm getting a call saying, oh gosh, I'm in a fibro flare and I can't get out of it. And it turns out they got COVID, whether they had symptoms or not. But now 3 months later, they're just in a nosedive because of COVID. I got one patient that's the COVID, the cytokine storm, this overreaction, which this galactin-3 reaction is what we're hearing, just is trying to destroy her kidney cells. So she's developing CKD, chronic kidney disease. And the doctors are telling her, we don't really know what to do with you. You're just going to have to go on dialysis in a few years. Well, obviously she didn't want to hear that. So I've got her on the pectisol. She's already doing better. She had a consult with a nephrologist. He looked at her labs. He said, they're looking good to me. I don't know what you're doing, but keep it up. So this pectisol, this modified citrus pectin has been it's really been a godsend for me. It just gives me another tool. And I would say some of my patients would say it's been a godsend for them as well. So thank you for developing this product. Uh-oh, what happened? Somebody's unmuted. What's happened? You're muted? You're muted. Uh-oh, what happened here? Let me find you. Where's I? Oh, there we go. Whoop. There you go. Not sure what happened.
No, it was my fault.
You
I'm
did.
okay.
Okay,
No, I pushed. So it's interesting. Talking about COVID long haul, thank you also for sharing it. And I know my own experience because I actually had a severe COVID response because I overexerted myself. I was diagnosed in Israel with COVID 45 minutes before starting to teach a 7-day retreat for 150 people after 2.5 years of not being there. Can you imagine?
Oh,
Everybody is in the hallway waiting for me, and I'm diagnosed. So I actually turned antigen negative in 2 days, and I started teaching. But I overexerted myself. I got an immune response severe. And then I healed myself, and then it came back a few months later, and I was so sick 2 months ago, and now I'm like at full capacity. And of course, in Israel, I didn't have my supplement, wrong time, wrong place, but it was remarkable how I was able to heal myself. And MCP was a key factor in using therapeutic apheresis, which is my specialty. But so, and I treat people from all over the world who come and see me for COVID long haul because of our methods in the clinic. But specifically, we have to remember, just like we want to survive, the virus wants to survive. So if you look at the spike protein, its structure is practically identical to galectin-3.
Yeah.
Because just like we want to survive, the virus wants to survive. So just like galectin-3 will produce immune dysregulation in us, the spike protein, which resembles galectin-3, will produce immune dysregulation in our body. You can see the resemblance. So the same approach, of course, is very important and very helpful. And for CKD specifically, galectin-3 drives kidney disease. That's my research. That's my NIH research. When you block galectin-3, you attenuate kidney damage. And that's why, and people are not aware that 17% of the population, 1/7, have CKD. And galectin-3 drives it, just like it drives NASH and non-alcoholic liver disease. And the same process, this inflammatory fibrotic process, because in both conditions, we lose the flexibility, we lose the plasticity. Just what you described for fibromyalgia is universal for so many conditions.
Yeah. So the other product you mentioned was the Tibetan pain formula, which is the Padma, right? Padma?
Right.
And so I'm just have started using that in the last month or so with some of my patients with some good results as well. Not as much as the Pectisol, but the folks, the patients that I do have on it, I'm getting some really good feedback. And I like the fact that it's all natural. There's some things I've used in the past, even though they were over the counter, that oftentimes they would use these products and it'd be too stimulating, like DLPA or SAMe, some of these things, which are, can be very helpful. But I really like the Padman. I think it's going to be really helpful. We've got some questions coming in, so I want to just see if I can take some of these right here, and let's see about these. Well, first of all, it says, this is going to be repeated. Yes, we're recording this, so we'll make sure we send it out to everybody that's on the email list. If you're not on the email list, I want to encourage you to get on my email list. You just go to yourfibrodoctor.com. There's some free reports. Grab whichever ones you want. There's a bunch of them on there, and you'll be on the list. And if you ever don't want to be on the list, you're one click away, so no big deal. Someone's asking, where can you find out more about these products? You can go to yourfibrodoctor.com/special. And there we have a little page there where you can learn more about these products. And we're also, and I really appreciate you doing this to this audience, giving a 20% discount. So that's a big discount. Thank you, Isaac. That's very kind of you. So that's on that page. I've got it posted both on Facebook, and I'll put it here in the chat box here in just a minute. But it's yourfibrodoctor.com/special, and you can read more about these products. Someone's asking about, will this product, will it help with nerve pain? So will it help with neuropathy? And I'll let you answer that. I mean, I know the answer, but I'll let you talk a little bit more about how this product can help with a nerve type of pain,
Right.
nerve pain.
So modified tetrospectin will help with neuroinflammation. And often nerve pain can be related to neuroinflammation. Neuropathy in general is a little bit more complex. So specifically
It's the
for
hard-
neuropathy, in addition to adding the classical B vitamins that you need, B1, B2, B12, and especially methyl B12, really try to use Honopure. You start with 1 twice a day with food, and you go up to 2 twice a day, because Honopure will regulate the cell metabolism and will be very effective for nerve cell function. I was the only place in the world, now I can share because I can't do it anymore, that used to do Honopure intravenously, especially for cancer patients, but also for chronic pain. And it would resolve neuropathic pain like nothing. Even pain that wasn't helped by opiates would get better. But this was intravenously, it's not available. But in general, Honopure is a very powerful, has a very powerful role, and you can add the Pedma Basic, of course, into it. Because when you look at nervous system tissue, you got the oxidative inflammatory part, and you got the circulatory part, and they work together. The one feeds the other. So both are very important.
So we've got this, Vanessa's asking, she's saying her environmental toxins are my triggers, causes gastric problems and inflammation in my chest, was diagnosed also with costochondritis. Is this the result of fibromyalgia? So I assume you're asking, are the environmental triggers creating your fibromyalgia? And, it's a culmination of things, but as Isaac was talking about, Dr. Eliaz was talking about treating upstream. And I mentioned the hypothalamus, and we're talking about the survival paradox, but absolutely, it's a stressor. Environmental toxins are a stressor. You can have stressful thoughts, you can have stressful trauma, you can have, pollution, you can have an infection, anything that's a stress to your body, real or imagined, by the way, it can create this inflammation and turn on this galactin-3 that for whatever reason is not getting turned off. It's a normal process that just kind of goes haywire. And this Pectisol is designed to turn that off. And yes, the other part of your question, can that be what's going on with costochondritis? Absolutely. I can't tell you how many patients I've had over the years who wind up in the emergency room thinking they're having a heart attack, and it's costochondritis. That's all it is. And it's their fibro. This inflammation is, for whatever reason, it's chosen to attack this tissue here. But again, as Dr. Eliaz has talked about, this Pectisol is designed to help to shut down that whole inflammatory overreach that's going on in the body.
Right. And we have to remember, we can shut it down. So we have the simplest biochemical support. That's why, in my opinion, Pectisol is the most important supplement. It wasn't like this 10, 15 years ago. It wasn't the first on my list. Now it's the first on my list for every patient, because galactin-3 drives unhealthy aging. But in the same time, now that we understand the survival response, we understand that we have the power of our mind, of our heart to change it. So in my meditation and healing retreats, the most dramatic responses are in fibromyalgia patients. People who had pains for decades spend a few days and suddenly the pains are gone, because they changed their psychospiritual, emotional flow, they changed their metabolic flow, they regained, like you said so well, the plasticity, the flexibility. And what happened what is pain? Pain is the body telling us something is wrong. It's an alarm, it's a survival response. So when we gain the flexibility, when we get a sense of safety, the alarm goes down, it changes our neurotransmitters, and the pain goes away. The pain goes away, we can relax. So it's a cycle, and we have to nourish the cycle. So one of the most important principles for people with fibromyalgia is to take good care of your health and put more energy into it when you feel good, not when you're in crisis, because this is when you are filling your reservoir with support. That's when your health can expand itself. Very important.
I remember you, one of our interviews, and I remember asking you, we were talking about the survival paradox. I said, well, Isaac, what can you do for it? Is there a supplement? And you didn't say anything about galactin-3 and Pectus or anything. You said meditate. And you know, that's so true, because if you don't change your physiology, you know, through stress reducing techniques, I think you're sabotaging yourself. I know for my patients that do the best, who've worked with me over the last 22 years, it's the ones that will heed my advice, which is make sure you have an hour of power every day. And it could be a half an hour, it could be, you know, quarter an hour. I don't know. I find an hour, and I'm pretty busy. And I know Isaac meditates every day. He finds time to exercise and meditate. So he's really busy. So you can find that time. You deserve that time to meditate, pray, read positive material that feeds your soul, whether that's Wayne Dyer or Deepak Chopra or Joyce Meyer or Zig Ziglar, whomever. You need to be feeding your soul with this positive energy. And if you're not, you're really doing yourself a disadvantage. And now that you've learned about this whole thing about the survival paradox and the fact that you really have to give your body permission to turn off this defense, you know, posture. If you don't do that, you're going to probably be experiencing one fibro flare after another. You're going to feel better for a period of time, but all it takes is another stressful event, and bam, you're right back where you were.
And I want to add some words. There's somebody who had an experience. I came to the United States in 1988 to choose my Chinese medical school. I was a doctor, and I went for 1 hour to Clear Lake early morning to meditate, and I got a tick bite I didn't know, and I went back to Israel, and my liver enzymes were 10,000. Okay, I almost died, and I it took me a few years to recover, but I'm fully recovered. So I had my own experience, but I want to expand this really important thing, Rodger, that you shared. So the fibromyalgia is contraction, it's pain. And the other side of it is expansion and freedom. One is self-absorption, and one is open heart, love, and compassion. And the thing about open heart, the thing about freedom, which is a natural movement, by the way, of the universe, anthropy, is that it's endless. It never ends. So when you meditate, when you do things for yourself and you feel that you are expanding, whatever is so amazing, don't hold to it. Like, wow, I'm the best. No. Just let go, because it can always expand more. And I know it as somebody who spent 20 years going 2 months a year. I would go and do my own solitary retreat for 20 years, leave everything behind. My poor family supported me, and go to the mountains, sometimes very remote places. If something happened to me, they would never find me, and just sit the whole day in nature and just meditate into the sky. And you feel the things unfold and unfold and unfold, and insight comes up, and our heart opens a little bit more, and our physical health improves, and our cellular health improves, and the way we look changes. And it's an amazing journey. And this quality of openness, as we age, obviously, we don't look as young, we are not as strong. There's a natural aging process. But this sense of being able to connect to this inner vast openness just grows with time. That's what wisdom is about. That's really the wisdom of that comes with age, you know? And it's a part of the process that really can heal with fibromyalgia. And it's very important because we're in a real crisis. The muscle activation, the mycotoxin response, the worry about reacting to a supplement, about reacting to something. right there is a contraction. And the mind has a huge power because what causes the pain is neuroinflammation. And what causes neuroinflammation is this crisis contraction that can be triggered by a chemical, but can also be triggered by our habits, by our epigenetics, by the way that our mind and heart functions. And that's why we are a being with infinite healing potential, because everything changes all the time.
Yeah. So one of the questions is, Isaac, how long would you need to take the Pectosol? If you were taking it to help with inflammation and pain, fibromyalgia, how long would you need to be on that product?
My answer, Mike, I will answer with a question. I'm from Israel. I'm Jewish. Jewish people answer to a question with a question. How long are you going to keep on breathing?
Yeah.
That's as long. As long as you're alive, you're going to create inflammatory responses. As long as you age, it's going to get a little bit worse because our repair system is not as fresh. Why? Because it has a lot of trauma that is responding to. So Pectosol, just like people take vitamin D every day and vitamin C every day and fish oil, you can get fish oil from fish. You can get vitamin D from being in the sun. You can get, you can get vitamin C from food. You cannot get modified cytospectin. You cannot. You got to take it as a supplement. And once you take it, everything else works better, because if you look at the other compound I mentioned, they work downstream of galectin-3. And that's why MCP, Pectosol, needs to be a part of a daily program. We just presented a multi-center trial on biochemical relapse of prostate cancer in the biggest urological cancer conference in Europe. So this was a long-term, 18 months follow-up, multiple center trial. 90% of the patient benefited compared to baseline 18 months earlier. It's not that modified cytospectin killed the prostate cancer. It allowed the body to take care of the prostate cancer. So what modified cytospectin does, what addressing galectin-3 will do, it will allow our innate immune system to respond normally, our innate inflammatory system to respond in a normal way, like I describe in the book, like a bird's flying in the sky without leaving a trace. You heal, and there are no consequences. The consequence of inflammation, if not done properly, is fibrosis and organ degeneration. And so that's why Pectosol has to be part of your regimen. It's more important than any. You cannot get it from something else.
And that's kind of when people ask me, how long should I be taking the Fibro formula, which is a formula I developed, kind of lay the baseline for these folks to be able to shore up any nutritional deficiencies, hormone deficiencies as well. And, people will take this for months and they're doing great. And and I know you get tired of taking stuff. I do too. I take a lot of supplements, but I get tired of it. But when they ask me, that's kind of my response. How long, do you want to stay healthy, or do you want to go back to where you were? So yeah, is it a bit of a hassle to continue to stay on a supplement? It is, but which would you rather do? Would you rather stay on a supplement, invest in that? Or would you rather continuously be in fibro flares and going and seeing doctors who probably are not really helping you and putting you on medications that oftentimes can make you worse? So I know it's kind of frustrating to think that you'd have to take something and stay on it, but I don't know. I know if I had fibro, thank goodness I don't, but I totally understand it. I'd go walk through a burning fire on broken glass. I'd go to a shaman in, the deepest, darkest jungle. If I knew that I could get ongoing relief, I would do it. So,
and I know from my own experience, from my own health journey, but when you are doing better, you can reduce the dose. You may find out that it's enough for you to take 1 scoop a day, 1 scoop twice a day. But we have to address galectin-3. A very large study, it's called the Birmingham Offspring study, looked at about 8,000 people at the age 50 and their galectin-3 levels. And the lowest 40% of galectin-3 level compared to the upper 20%, not big difference, 15.6 compared to 10.5, not a big difference. Because you don't need a big difference in the top, right? Look at this angle. Now it changes a little bit, and then it becomes very different. So interleukin-6 will go up 1,000 times. Galectin-3 will go up by 50%. But for the people at the top 20%, their all-cause mortality over 10 years tripled compared to the one in the lowest. So this is why we have to address galectin-3. It's a fundamental survival response that we pay a very heavy price for. And now we have something that can address it. And that's why we are getting this kind of feedback in our clinical trials, you know?
Yeah. So a question is, someone, I guess, has already looked on your site. They're asking about powder or capsules. And personally, the powder is a better, it's priced better. So, it's not as convenient as taking a capsule, but anytime you use a powder or liquid, usually, cost-wise, you're gonna do a little better. Most all of my patients, I'm trying to think, few of them have switched to capsules. They didn't like the powder, but just about every one of my patients is using the powder. So that's what I recommend.
Right. Yeah. The powder definitely, powder always has better absorption, and the clinical trials are on capsules because we have to regulate them. But yeah, powders, and there is plain powder and there is lime taste powder. Many people like lime taste. I'm a capsule guy, so I can throw 30 capsules in one shot, and I travel a lot. But yeah, powder is always preferable. Also, when you have powder, you can mix it with other things. You can, when you dissolve it in water, you can add the probiotic. You can add a mushroom powder. You can even add the green drinks if you're doing them. There's more flexibility. And also from the point of view of taking Pectosol, it's enough to take it 15 minutes before food. You don't have to take it an hour and a half, and an hour after food. I take it usually in the morning and before bedtime. I throw in 9 capsules with a few more capsules.
Yeah. So, and I have to admit, I'm a capsule person too. I'm taking it myself. You were kind enough to send me some samples. I got hooked on. I really like the way I feel. And one thing we've talked about, it shutting down inflammation, but the other thing we know with fibromyalgia is they have less mitochondria than the normal person. And a lot of times they have the mitochondria that they do have, these trillions of mitochondria that are driving the energy and function of the cells. They're dysfunctional. They're not working like they're supposed to. And one of the things you mentioned earlier that I think is important that we mention one more time is this idea of hypoxia, where you're not making the energy in a certain way. So you're making, instead of aerobically, you're making it anaerobically. And that's really an inefficient way to make the energy that the cells need. So they need ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And I forget, you have in there, I think it's 30, if you're doing it aerobically, you got 36. Plenty of oxygen, it's 36 ATP.
Right. And when you do it with glycolysis, it's only 2. So it's 2. So it's only 5% efficiency. But when you are in survival, you need everything fast. So you can do it 100 times faster, but at a terrible price, right? So for example, when you do short runs, like 100 meters, 100 yards, afterwards the muscles are very tight because we used glycolysis to produce energy very fast, a lot of lactic acid. And lactic acid changes the pH. You change the pH, the cell has an experience of less oxygen. So there's something called hypoxia-inducing factor. And then it pushes glycolysis even more because it feels, oh my God, we don't have oxygen. We can't use it properly. We have to go through glycolysis, produce energy without oxygen. Even if there is oxygen, the classical cell that does it is a cancer cell. It's called the Warburg effect. So yes, and in this sense, modified spectrum really changes extracellularly, affects the receptors on the cell membrane, and then will affect the metabolism. Honokiol, berberine, curcumin a little bit changes it intracellularly. And then the different B vitamins and minerals and zinc and alpha lipoic acid and B1 and B12 that are needed for the Krebs cycle. So it's a combination that is needed. But if you don't have enough mitochondria, you sure want to make sure that you are using them properly.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think, and I'm knock on wood, really healthy, but I think what I've noticed is just a little more stamina, right. and I see, and I play pickleball a couple hours every day. It's my new obsession for the last year or so is pickleball. Work out, do other things too, but I love pickleball. But I've noticed that since I've been taking the Pectisol that I have
Right.
a quicker recovery time. And I feel like I'm just have more energy, more burst energy when I'm out there on the court. I don't know what else it could be, but
It's remarkable. It's not like you're taking something that is a stimulant. You are
no,
allowing your body to function more efficiently.
yeah,
That's so key with less unhealthy byproducts.
yeah. But the not building up that lactic acid. I mean, that's such a thing with fibromyalgia. They've heard that, you build up these trigger points from the lactic acid, this is another way to combat that. So there's many phases or things that this does, layers, and I encourage you to get the book. But as you go through the book, maybe you will or you won't have these aha moments that I had. But studying fibro and researching it and lecturing about it, there were so many aha moments about how turning off this over ramped up galactin-3, there's just so much in there. So I want to encourage everybody to go to yourfibrodoctor.com/special, and you can read more about the products. And again, thank you, Isaac, for giving them a
Thank you. Wow,
we appreciate that. 20% off is really kind of you.
Yeah, what a great discussion. Thank you everybody for listening. And for me, as I mentioned, because I started my healing career as a teenager, learning Taekwondo in Korea. I was fortunate to practice with the national team because I needed to learn English, and being a yoga teacher. So I dealt a lot with fibromyalgia while I was in medical school, and I recognized the importance of the diagnosis. I was kind of like a loner, this group of patients didn't get the attention and the respect they deserve. They got criticized as if it's psychosomatic. It's my God, what a narrow-mindedness of any healer or doctor not to respect how their patients feel. So for me, whenever I talk about to this group of, and then true enough, I had my own experiences and I healed from it. And so definitely. And so for me, I'm always thrilled. And it's also, it's like an obligation I have to this audience. So I really hope that some of you benefited from, Rodger, from the wisdom that you shared, from a little bit of my experience, and be well, all of you.
Oh, thank you so much. And for those of you that are just coming on, got in kind of late, if you go to the Facebook page, your Facebook, I always get this wrong, Facebook, Your Fibro Doctor, that's where you would find my page that we're on the live right now. That'll be on there, so you can watch the replay anytime you want to. If you want to get your own copy, though, make sure you're on the email list, and you can do that by going and getting one of the free reports at yourfibrodoctor.com. And one last time, I'm going to mention it because someone else is asking, I don't know why. It's to learn more about the products and some of the things that we've talked about, go to yourfibrodoctor.com/special. And there's a lot of great information that's on there for you that'll go into more detail that we couldn't talk about these products, how they can benefit you. And Isaac, thank you so much. I got to have you come back on.
Thank you. Yeah, please do. I love talking to you. So I hope we get to talk again.
Oh, thanks so much. Thank you everybody for joining us. God bless. Have a wonderful evening and look forward to being on here next week. Take care.
Thank you.